welcome to the CST's monthly webinar on exploring how ideas in complexity thinking and resilience thinking can be implemented and applied in today's crazy world or complex world that we're seeing. And we're still enjoying this webinar format. We started the webinar format in March last year, or in April, when the lockdown started, and I think today is the 301st day where South Africa is in lockdown. And we've had curfews. For those of you who are joining us from Europe, we've had curfews from that first day already, and some other kinds of interesting restrictions. But I think yeah, it's a wonderful way to be able to. One of the, I think, the really positive outcomes of this webinar is that we can actually link up and engage with people all over the world. And today is such a day where we are fortunate to have Professor Walter Baets as our guest presenter, and he's sitting in the Netherlands. And this would not have been possible if we were having to fly around the world. So thank you very much for joining this community, and thank you very much for your time. We'll be strictly ending at 2 o'clock. Usually these webinars have a kind of a format that we have a presentation starting, and then we have some kind of questions and discussion that we can have afterwards. I know this webinar format is not extremely participatory, and the way that we do this here is that we ask participants to introduce them in the chat box. So if you press on the little chat icon at the bottom of your screen, it would be wonderful for us if you could just say hi, where you're from, maybe what the focus of your work is. Then we can share some experience of where people are from and what they're interested in, what they're focusing on. That's always nice to be reading whilst we're listening to each other. And then if the format or the housekeeping rules for question and answers is to just press on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and to post or type your questions there. And I'll be moderating the questions that you're directing, or the discussions, or even if you have suggestions or little comments, to put them in there. That's one way that we can sort of engage with one another. Sometimes we go on live and I make all the participants live, but for today will be too many people to do that. So we have the chat box and the Q&A box as one function of engaging. I see someone's already, yeah, you're all automatically muted. So engaging in that way. So just for those of you who are joining us from other spaces and other places, I see we have Valentin already from Spain, and we have someone from Claudia from Barcelona, and Joachim from Australia. Hi Joachim, nice to see you again. So we're a wild bunch from all over the world, and just to say welcome to the CST webinar, the Center for Complex Systems and Transition. We're an interdisciplinary research center based at the Stellenbosch University in Cape Town, and we do research on sustainability and transformative issues by using a complexity lens. And today's speaker is Professor Walter Baets. He'll introduce himself shortly, but I just want to say the first time I met you, Walter, was in Stellenbosch at the STIAS conferencing center, and I think you were also a speaker at one of our complexity workshops that Paul Sellier still chaired. And I remember you arriving with your motorbike and your very small jacket, and then taking out your formal jacket and presenting and using the example. And then when you used the example of Tino Rossi and the edge of chaos, it all just made sense to me. But in more honesty, yeah, Professor Walter Baets is Professor Emeritus at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. He's currently engaged in many different kinds of projects, and he will tell us a little bit more than that, I hope. But when I met him, he was the Dean or Director of the Graduate School of Business, which he totally reformed when he got there, and it has a huge legacy of systems thinking and complexity, and it's still a very dominant paradigm that informs the Graduate School of Business at the UCT. And he was also a chair, the head of the Allen Gray Chair in Values-Based Leadership. and currently is based in the Netherlands. And I think it would be wonderful if you could maybe just introduce yourself, where you are, what you've been doing, Walter, and that we can catch up on that. And we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Very kind words. First, thanks for the invitation, and thanks to all of you that take the time to listen to this story. Indeed, for those of you that don't know me that well, I have been riding motorbikes for many years, and in South Africa I had a Harley Davidson. What else can you have? And I use it always since the weather allowed that. So I won't show the famous picture of Valentino Rossi, which I use in many presentations, and which indeed remarkably stays in the mind of many people. First of all, I apologize. I can't put the screen in full screen mode, since then you don't see anything. So you'll have to do with this mode, which, other than for the second transparency, is not the worst thing to have. So, as Rika correctly said, I had a long academic career, and I'm now Professor Emeritus at the University of Cape Town. I've been in France, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, and I even started the ever first business school in Russia when it was still the Soviet Union in 1990, when it was about to change its name. As an academic, I've been 25 years extremely active in complexity theory and systems thinking, and not that much from theoretical perspective, but really as your center equally is interested, of course, in the applications and what does it mean to look from a complexity ontology into, and in my case particularly, into something which I think is important, which is business model innovation. As Rika said, I had the pleasure to be in the center a few times before, and to be very honest, the reason I ended up in South Africa was a conference at the center before I ever arrived, and I was there, was indeed one that was run by Paul Cillier still. And my wife landed and she said, this is the place where we have to be. And that's exactly why we came to South Africa. So it's not even a joke. So it was a conference in Eurocenter that eventually brought me for 7 years there. For the time being, I'm mainly working on the one hand for the Eindhoven Engine, which is a corporation of the Technical University Eindhoven, University of Applied Sciences Eindhoven, and the Dutch Science Board, I think that's the translation, which is an innovation accelerator, where you really try to work together in order to get your innovations faster to market. And what does that mean, and how do you do that? And to pay much more attention, and then you get into business model innovation, to pay much more attention to the impact that such an innovation could have on the market. On the other hand, I'm working with the University of Applied Sciences in Rotterdam, where I'm experimenting with what I call a living lab, and I'll explain further in the presentation what that means. And then for the rest, I'm still occasionally doing, I'm a speaker at left and right. I'm doing some consulting with companies all around. What if you really accept for a minute that the world is complex, you can't control it, you can't steer it, it's all emerging and it all comes from all sides, but still you need to go with it, and you have to be prepared for that future, whatever that future would mean. Now, this is the only slide that normally I build up line by line, and now you get it all together, so I apologize for that. We live in a literally complex world. Complex in the sense is nonlinear, dynamic, ever-moving, changes, emerging, etc. I'll get back to defining what I understand by complexity a little bit further. While our thinking, even our teaching and our management practice is still very often linear, silo-based, deterministic, causal. We think that we know, Newtonian, we think that we know what happens tomorrow, while we know we don't know, but we run a company as if we would know what happens tomorrow. And then of course our management fails, since we don't know what happens tomorrow, and we don't have a management that emerges with that emerging reality. If that complexity, the nature of the world, is not bad enough, we are now disrupted by exponential technologies, whether they evolve exponentially, whether they are really disruptive, that's a whole discussion apart. Obviously, technologies, and certainly artificial intelligence and machine learning might have a serious impact on our understanding of society and our capacity to visualize society. Robots is another development that I really think might have an impact, not those little robots that walk around and do what humans should do, but I mean all kind of very practical robots in medical care, etc., etc. Second major change for me, and really over the last 5-6 years, what I like to call societal exponentialities. And that are all those evolutions in society that 10-15 years ago we really wouldn't have anticipated. A week ago you would not have anticipated what has happened on the Capitol in Washington. A week ago you were unable to anticipate what would happen 2 days later. Right? That's societal exponentiality. Trump is a societal exponentiality. Climate is one like those. You know, we talk about it for 30 years, I guess, from starting from the Club of Rome, but suddenly how it impacts and how you have bushfires and floodings and all those kind of things all around the world, we certainly say, oh boy, you know, we don't have it under control. No, we don't have it under control. Inequality, poverty, these are all societal exponentialities that really need our attention and that create additional context, since it's all about the context, that makes the complex world even more complicated, if you want to. We literally live in an era of exponentialities, exponential organizations, network organizations, corporations of people. We see less and less those big, huge companies, or at least they get more and more criticized. And the impact of all that, which is what I would like to call a changing reality, you see that on organizations with a stronger focus on how to mobilize collective intelligence to do the things that we don't do today and that we can't even imagine to do today. I'll get to that later. In education and research, it is a growing focus, too slow, into the use of ecosystems for research, education, innovation. I'll talk a little bit about that when I talk about living labs. And of course, the real challenge for individuals to transform themselves, to feel more comfortable with that complexity, to be able to think and work in networks, to think systemically. Corona, needless to say, a fantastic example of how difficult it is to consider something like that pandemic systemic. If we don't consider it systemic, we'll never find a solution to any of the subsystems of that pandemic. We see more and more an engaged society, people that are interested in values, purpose, meaning, contribution, up to the point that younger generations are more interested or becoming more interested in organizations that do something meaningful than in jobs that give a huge status, a big car, and a huge salary. And the necessity, since the world is so rapidly changing, of agile innovation. So most classical innovation takes 3, 4, 5 years. By the time your thing is innovated, it's out of date. Now, in an ever-changing, fast-moving society, we have to be much more agile. So we cannot continue as we do to find remedies for the symptoms. We always run behind the reality. We need to work on systemic causes, not just on understanding causes, but on understanding them systemically. And the next new skill set is not going to help us. We really need, and that's what I'll explain further in this presentation, we really need a fundamental transformation. And that transformation is from, call it linear thinking, deterministic thinking, control-driven thinking, whatever. I'm not into pure academic definitions. I left academia for that. We have to move into a more complex, an acceptance of the complexity of the world, and I put between brackets, not the mathematical complexity, not the physical complexity, not the Prigogine complexity, for those of you familiar with complexity, but the whole complex adaptive systems. And I also explained that a little bit further. So the problem is we are prisoner of our linear thinking. We continue doing what we've always done, and therefore we continue getting what we always got. We hardly innovate, we don't dare, we're not used, we don't do it, and we research. And we search what already has been searched, and therefore we find what already has been found. So research really has to go wildly into exploring new directions. Now, what are the characteristics of a worldview based on complexity? And again, I say rather on complex adaptive systems. One, nonlinearity, and I think you will all agree and you will all recognize those characteristics, but we don't necessarily as organizations live according to those characteristics. So nonlinearity, dynamic behavior, the value of today is function of the value of yesterday. A very important one, and of course the red ones are the more important ones, I'll get back to them in a minute, is interconnectedness. Everything is interconnected to everything. So the whole idea of a network, the choice that in your decisions you look for the network is very crucial. And I've put there Ubuntu specifically for the Africans amongst you, since that is for the Europeans. I mean, European or the global northern view of the world is very Cartesian. I am, I think, therefore I am, and the others will see. Ubuntu is I am since I belong. So you start from a perspective that you are only who you are since you belong to a wider community. The whole concept of community, and what I often say about values-based innovation, is an upfront choice for the network. And if you really want to innovate values-based, then you start by saying, I do this for everybody. What the World Economic Forum finally 2 years ago called stakeholder capitalism. So even they finally got the point that there are more people involved in business than the business people themselves. That network, of course, creates interaction, which is crucial, since out of that interaction of intelligent, interacting, autonomous agents, we get emergence. And I'll get a little bit further to how and why collective intelligence works based on those intelligent, interacting, autonomous agents. That creates emergence, as I say, and has a format of acausality or multiple simultaneous causalities or whatever, but certainly doesn't have deterministic equations as its basis. It is systemic, it is fundamentally systemic, and cutting that system in pieces will only create more problems. There is a huge role for consciousness. I won't go too far on that today, but what I've discovered in particularly the many years of research is the role of consciousness, which I like to translate as the soul of the company. What you feel if you walk into a building. And I was always very proud when I was the director of the GSB that alumni that came in the prison, it's a prison for those of you that don't know it, that came in the prison said, there is another vibe here in that building. And that's what I refer to as the soul. I was also very proud about that. It was one of the things I was most proud about, by the way, concerning the GSBs, that people really felt that there was another vibe in that building. The purpose-drivenness of innovations, where in the past we innovate since we are Philips and therefore we need to develop the next kind of lighting, or we are ASML and therefore we need to develop the next kind of wafer technology. Now we say, just a minute, but why would we do that? What is the purpose of that innovation? What is the impact of that innovation? And by the way, that is what makes most innovation today wicked. Since if you bring in the purpose and the meaning, then it becomes a really difficult problem, and you don't necessarily know where the solution leads you to. What is the solution of Corona? We don't know, and that is what makes it a wicked problem. That is what makes it interesting to study it, but it makes it difficult also. Highly context sensitive, and many will say that complexities is a rather postmodern ontology, which means that not too much of analysis, just try it out, pilot, experiment, learn, adapt, and be open to all kinds of possible truths, not the alternative truths of Trump, but all the reasonable truths, right? I mean, and they're all possibly equally true, and you have to pay attention to them. Now, that is the worldview, which I think helps a lot if you want to move into innovation. And I always use this poem, I've used it for 20 years, and I've taken it from other big thinkers. I think even that Paul Cilliers used it at occasions, but certainly Varela used it, and Jean-Louis Lemoyne, which was a great complexity thinker in France. Wonder your footprints are the path and nothing more. Wonder there is no path, it is created as you walk. By walking, you make the path before you. And when you look behind, you see the path which after you will not be trod again. Wonder there is no path, but the ripples on the waters. And that is so interesting. Huh? So in a complexity paradigm, there is no path. You know, you do lay down a path in walking, and you have to do that, and that's where you innovate. But we can't analyze any meaningful path in the past that might remain meaningful in the future, right? And I think this poem says that very nicely. How do you deal with a complex situation? And I get to the picture in a minute. It's not by accident there. The way I deal with organizations around using that complexity perspective in innovation is to create a purposeful, I'll get back to that clearly, systemic, intergenerational experience, which I call a living lab, where you really try to bring life together, research, and of course action research, not analytical research, experimentation, piloting, creation, innovation. You work on real problems with real people. One of the programs that have been very successful at the GSB was a master's in inclusive business model innovation, which really had a very simple baseline. You come on board with a real problem and real people. And the only thing you do during the whole year is you work on a real solution for that real problem with those real people. And by the way, those real people are going to decide whether your real problem is a real problem. Still a very successful program. I advise you to have a look there. But that was one of my earlier experiments in what I call now living labs. Of course, you bring in the learning as well, the students as learners, as lifelong learning. Huh? So the managers, the adults. And what you want to create is you want to organize serendipity. It's a contradiction terminis, but nevertheless, huh? You want to create an environment where coincidences happen and are orchestrated. And out of those coincidences, you can really make huge innovations. Now, crucial in there is the purposefulness. And you see that guy at the left who clearly does not want to be on that picture. And he was the manager of a beet factory in Kenya, somewhere in the area of Nairobi. And I really like that poster, but you can't just take a picture of a poster. So I wanted to have the CEO with it, and clearly he didn't want that. What I really like in that, if you read the two first lines, the mission of Kazuri, which is the name, is to provide and sustain employment opportunities for disadvantaged members of Kenyan society. Now, what they were, paragraph 2, was a very successful internationally operating beet factory. So they have handmade and hand-painted ceramic jewelry and pottery. That is not their purpose. That is the way how they realize their purpose. And they employ 340 mostly single mothers. And again, if you walk, and I really advise you if you're ever there to do that, if you walk into that building, you feel the soul of that building. Fantastic things happen in that building. And while it is a classical industry, a beet factory, there are innovations taking place daily. And that was an extremely, for me, enlightening example of how you could organize that. Now, what is a living lab? Some call it a studio, particularly in the architectural realm. It's a word that's often used. Some call it an innovation ecosystems. It's a place and a space. It is a place, it's a co-location. It is people that meet together in order to create that serendipity, in order to create that non-creatable coincidence. But of course, that place, that physical place, can be extended in a space. It is a space of cooperation, which, since we are humans, seem to work much better if you start at least from a physical place. Secondly, it is a diverse ecosystem, as diverse as possible, for the very simple reason that you learn from those people that disagree, not from the people that agree with you. So the more diverse you make it, background, discipline, age, political conviction, whatever, and the more you're open for co-creation and open innovation, the more you create the potential for learning. And thirdly, it is based on a methodology of co-creation. If you bring 10 smart people together, they either agree and nothing happens, or they disagree and you often get a war. So you really have to work And what I do is using a methodology which is based on a combination of design thinking and systems thinking in order to facilitate the creation of that process of laying down the path in walking, and laying down the path in walking in different directions, right? Now, with those living lab structures, I experiment a lot in Rotterdam. The Eindhoven engine, in some respect, is such a living lab, right? It's one big entity, but it's the same concept. It's an innovation ecosystem. Now, what you have to pay attention to is what I like to call the conditions for collective intelligence. And it's based on artificial life research, for those of you that know it, but I always use it in either soccer metaphors or flamenco metaphors or jazz metaphors. For those of you that know me, I often use a live flamenco performance in my courses in order to illustrate what I'm going to explain you now. Then I don't explain anything, then you see it yourself. In order for a soccer team to become world champions, say, there are a few conditions. First of all players, agents, need to be good enough. They don't need to be excellent. They need to be good enough. Or all jazz musicians need to be good enough. They don't need to be excellent. Secondly, the playing field needs to be defined correctly. Now, in soccer, that's easy, since the soccer field is easily defined. In jazz, it's often a pub. And of course, everybody has to be in the same pub, since otherwise it doesn't work. So if not everybody has the same address, it's not going to fly. Thirdly, all players have to share the same goal. Now, in soccer, that's easy. That's scoring goals, 10 in one direction, 10 in another direction. With jazz, it is giving yourself as a musician, but also the audience, a nice evening. That's the purpose. By the way, if somebody has another purpose, the thing is not flying, right? And then last but not least, you have to agree on a minimum set of interaction rules. And for soccer, that are the rules of the game. You shouldn't kick each other. It doesn't look like a rule, but it's a rule. You shouldn't touch the ball with your hands. In jazz, or in flamenco, by the way, the musicians agree on a set of chords. And they agree to play in those 4 chords. And that's it. And then somebody starts. In soccer, the referee whistles, and suddenly a whole complex game emerges out of the interaction of those 20 smart enough, interacting, and autonomous, since nobody tells them what they have to do, agents, which are soccer players. For flamenco, exactly the same. Somebody starts, and all the rest goes with that one, and they co-create live. They don't rehearse anything. They co-create live within the chords, within the rules that they have. They create reality. Now, back to your organizations. Are your players good enough? Are they intelligent enough for what they need to do? Are they autonomous enough? Nobody should decide for them. A soccer player decides him or herself what he or she does. And are they willing to interact? If not, you're going to get into trouble and you're not going to be able to release that collective intelligence. Is the playing field correctly defined? Do you know what you're doing? Is it clear what you're working on? Do all the players share the same goals, or do they all play their own game? Then it won't work either. And of course, at the end of the day, did you agree on that minimum set of interaction rules? And what this allows is, again, what I like in this little poem of Rabindranath Tagore, a very great musician, came and stayed in our house. He made one big mistake. He was determined to teach me music, and consequently no learning took place. Nevertheless, I did casually pick up from him a certain amount of stolen knowledge, serendipity. The fact that you pick up things that you even don't know. You don't know what you don't know. That's a big problem. If I would ask you for a minute, what is it what you don't know and what you would like to learn, you don't know, since you don't know what you don't know. But that's what you want to learn. In such a living lab, in such an interaction of agents, it becomes clear. By a discussion, by a presentation, by working on the same project, it becomes clear what you know and what you don't know. And therefore, it becomes clear in which direction you have to develop yourself, which is also a crucial element of business model innovation. Impact is often not made by a focus on technical innovation. That takes place anyway, at least in universities, but even in some companies. We have technology too much, in a way. And it is not either created by a overly focused attention to successful startups. What makes impact is a focus on meaningful, economically viable, and scalable business models. And I think that is something which gets not enough attention. That is values-based business model innovation. Now, how do I work? And I'll rapidly go through that, since that is sort of, uh, if I work into an innovation ecosystem or with an organization, I go to these 6 steps, and not necessarily in this linear order, but they have to understand what it is, a complex and exponential world in one way or another. You will have to share some tools with them, tools out of design thinking, tools out of systems thinking. You'll have to get them to understand what a wicked problem is, what a complex adaptive system is, and how you can map those, how you can visualize those. Then you have to discuss with them how to organize for emergence, and then you go into the studios and the living labs and all other kinds of organizations, which of course you have to adapt to each specific organization. Then you talk about exponential leadership, which is a trainer of my soccer team, the leader of my jazz combo. What do you do? What don't you do? What is leadership? What is motivation? How do you support, etc., etc. And last but not least is the whole concept of personal transformation. No innovation will take place if we as individuals continue to do what we've always done. So we really have to be willing throughout the whole process to have enough introspection, reflection on our own role. And that starts with keeping a simple learning log. What did I learn? What did I encounter? What did I see? What I didn't expect? What surprised me? Up to what have I done with that? Right? And that's a way how to deal with organizations. You can do that in 5 virtual sessions or 6 virtual sessions within between work. You can do that in a full week session. I've done that in 30-hour courses for students, that famous 5 credit courses that you have in most engineering and business schools. You can do that in all kinds of formats. So summarize business model innovation via transformation. You need a lighthouse, which is the value, the purpose, the meaning, the contribution. Why are you doing this? What are you doing this for? The real outcome of the process will be a personal transformation. And that is what you take with you. So it's not just an exercise that you do, a product that you make. It's a transformation of your mindset. And that's the real outcome. The approach you use is basically a design thinking approach, close to the user, lots of creativity, lots of piloting, learning, prototyping, etc. And the viewpoint is one of complexity and systems thinking. That is sort of the frame within which you work. And to stop this presentation, which is roughly in time, if you want to build a ship, call people together and give them a desire for the endless sea. So don't start to hire a bunch of engineers. They are going to build you the ship that they've always built. But if you really want to have that new ship, whatever, that eco-friendly ship, that no fuel ship, I have no idea, then don't start there. Start by building that dream, building that desire, building that purpose, that meaning. And then behind that, you'll have, of course, at the end of the day, you still have to build, but that's at the end of the day, not in the beginning of today. Now that's my little introduction about how I interpret complex adaptive systems and what I do with this. These are a number of publications that all support my story. If at any point in time you would be interested to read more about it, you can certainly go there. But I hope it was not too short. I hope it was clear enough, and I'm very curious to hear about your questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Walter, for extremely refreshing presentation. It is amazing to see something that can be really abstract and being explained in such clear and simple terms. And once again, the examples that you use are extremely tacit, and they hit on a level of intuition and personal life experience but it carries the, the intellectual and the conceptual value and validity behind that. Thank you very much for that. In the
Thank
last
you.
2 or 3 years, I've been traveling the world, attending practitioner workshops and small consultancy workshops for people who are trying to apply complexity or systems ideas
Mhm.
in small businesses or in NGOs or developing organizations. And there's so much jargon out there, and schemes and methods and formulas. And what you've just presented is heavyweight. It's really based on years of experience, but also
Mhm.
the deep knowledge of complexity and systems thinking. And I really appreciate that. Extremely refreshing. Um,
Thank you.
I will try and not jump in on myself and the own questions that I have, um, which are amazing. One thing that I might just quickly link with is I love the idea of you using this notion of space or of place, which becomes something so much more than just a building or a
Yep.
container for people to arrive at, but that carries a deeper meaning in terms of allowing people to show up differently and to connect differently as humans with each other. And in some of the work that we've been doing, we've been trying to use the idea of transformative spaces as a
Mm.
guiding principle to allow us to think what are practices or ideas or tools that would allow people to experience the place that they come to as in a transformative space or place of learning and sharing. And that really resonated with me. And I think the big challenge we have today is how do we create those
Yes.
spaces online, and how do we exchange um, our intuitions and our lived experiences online. But I think also through the beautiful curation of your slides and the photos and the quotes that you've used, you've already transformed, a PowerPoint into something visually enticing and beautiful. And thank you very much for the effort and for, just for your
Pleasure.
that you bring to that. So I've got some questions here. One, or just a note from Odie Stradon, who works as a consultant in policy and business world. He said, organized serendipity. I love it. Maybe those seems like a contradiction. Maybe you'd like to say something about that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, look, it is of course the most, it's contradiction in terminus for sure, and is no doubt one of the most difficult aspects of all what I've said today. But it is that serendipity, if it works, if it happens, that is able to spark you off in a possibly completely new direction. It is extremely difficult, as we have all experienced, to brainstorm and say, let's find a new direction. And it doesn't necessarily come, since we do stay too much into what we know. We want to be nice to each other, whereas with serendipity you fall onto somebody that you don't know, you didn't need to know, you didn't need to meet. You listen to that story, and suddenly the light goes on. You say, this is interesting. Hey, can you tell me more? And before you know, not always, but before you know, it creates real new lines of innovation. And I think it's one of the big challenges, and I don't say it easily works. It's one of the big challenges that I've seen in my experience of all the innovation ecosystems I've been involved in. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes we try to overly organize it, and then it certainly doesn't work. But if you don't organize it, you have to be extremely lucky for it to happen. So there is somewhere that balance to do things. Like, for instance, what you could do is have different parties in your innovation ecosystem work together on a neutral project, a huge project of common interest, like cleaning the oceans. Now, that's already an old one, but when cleaning the ocean started as an issue, it was one of those projects that you would bring into an innovation space and say, let's have a big meeting and see how we could design something to clean oceans. And everybody wants to do that since it's meaningful, it's interesting, it's challenging. We don't know how to do that, but if we could do that, it would be great. And out of that organized serendipity, since that's in a way what you try to do, you sometimes get brilliant ideas, but it's difficult.
Wonderful to have that as to acknowledge that as a,
Mm,
yeah, as a kind of a causal, a causal thing, that we
mm.
often, there aren't words for those things. And it's wonderful that that you really give that such a prominence. So we've got some wonderful people on the call with us, and I'd love to actually make everyone live and have a huge conversation, but that'd be too much right now. We are 41 participants, but with us we have Jean Bolton from the UK, who's worked with us at STIAS, and we've collaborated often. She's also the author of the book Embracing Complexity, and worked on that with several other authors also, but she's excited to join us. She's also been teaching at UCT, and I see Koshik
Yes.
Sichuran is also joining us. Amazing. So Jean is asking, was just saying, the paradox of purpose. How do you balance the tension between what you collectively intend and what actually emerges, both in terms of unexpected opportunity, unexpected consequences? In what ways can purpose often get in the way, sometimes unintendedly?
I think that purpose gets in the way if you really want to realize it. It's almost a big Eastern wisdom. If you're detached of everything, nothing can go wrong. And though I would say it every day, I'm not necessarily able to live it every day. But that's a detail. But I think in this case, and responding or trying to respond to the question, I think that purpose gets in the way if you allow it to get in the way. And it's good to have a vision, since if you don't have a vision where you would like to go, I would like to contribute to a solution to corona, even if you have no clue what it is. You see, if out of that discussion would come, I don't know, a different way of dealing with health, with how to prevent people of becoming sick, then go for that. If that is the real innovation that comes out, split your team, have two projects, but don't kick out an idea that according to you is meaningful, is contributing, since it does not, in your opinion, immediately contributes to the purpose you had set out in the beginning.
Mm.
And I would say continue with multiple purposes. Now, in Wicked Problems, what's the purpose? I mean, the purpose is extremely vague. But I agree with Jane that it might come in the way of really being innovative, and within a corporate structure. Of course, corporates have clear goals, and innovation often does take place in the sidelines of what a company does. That is a real issue. So if you really would like to go to the type of innovation that I present here, I think you really have to upfront agree with the company management that you do have the freedom to innovate and not have the obligation to deliver whatever they expect you to deliver. But
Great.
it is a danger, I agree with that.
Yeah. So, and then another question, also from, I'm just going down the list. So I think Jean is also asking about the notion of exponential. Um, as well as very fast emergent change, there are also the situation that that can get you stuck and lock in. So it seems that the exponentiality gene, if I understand this correctly, could go both ways. It
Yes.
can exponentially grow or exponentially die or get stuck.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. First of all, we use exponential technologies, but of course they don't all move exponentially. I mean, that exponentiality comes from the exponential development of the computing power, that famous law. And I think there you see exponentiality. In other technologies, you don't see the same exponentiality. In some technologies, you do see rapid and sort of a development which is not linear, which is not nicely structured. You know, it goes by leaps and bounds and jumps and whatever. So exponentiality for me refers much more to the unpredictability of where the technology would go to. And secondly, so the unpredictability. Secondly, the speed with which it might evolve, but the speed with which it might impact organizations. That, I think, is an interesting fact. The speed, whether it's exponential or not, is another issue. That might be up and down, and I agree with that. So you can have fast changing evolutions up, where technology really changes your processes for the better, or it might die out. And one famous example, I think, is the blockchain, which 5 years ago we all thought would change the whole world in 2 years' time. We are now 3 years further, and I'm not so sure it had changed a lot. Now, I don't say that blockchain is dead. I don't say that blockchain has no use, but this is one of those technologies, if I recall 5 years ago, that was top of the list of all companies. Everybody had to, and eventually it didn't have the impact which it should have. Important is, for me, the rapidness, the rapidity, if you want to, of the change, and the uncontrollability of the change. So that for me is important in exponential technology. It's the same, by the way, in what I call societal exponentialities. It's the fact that you have no clue what happens tomorrow, and that it can happen very rapidly. Again, look to last week in the United States. Nobody would have anticipated how fast that societal exponentiality would go where it eventually went.
Yeah, it's the scale and the speed.
Yeah.
About which can come about in either direction. That's so different today.
Yeah.
Very much. I think Jean also remarked that she liked your answers. Thank you very much. A question from Tanya Hichert, who is a foresight practitioner here from South Africa, and we work closely together actually in engaging with many process designs and design working.
Mm-hmm.
But her question is, working with corporations or organizations, what, in your opinion, is the driver of organizations shifting to this approach? Some of us know that the linear Newtonian paradigms don't work anymore, but we still see organizations and institutions doubling down on doing things in the business as usual way.
Yeah, meaning and purpose. Yet again, that soul. There is if there are any other Dutch people, they'll know him. Siepsma is the CEO of Dutch State Mines. He has done a gorgeous job from turning the Dutch State Mines, as the word says, into a real biotech world giant company. And a year and a half ago, he nicely said in an interview, how can you call yourself or your company successful in a world that fails? That's it. I can't say it much better. You see, that guy has understood that he as a company has a responsibility towards that world. So if the world fails, and he gives lots of examples, if the world fails, he has failed. That's where it starts. If you have people that don't see, and I go back to my original Ubuntu remark, if people don't see that you are the world, that you are the environment, that you are the community, even if you are who you are and you do what you do, but people that disconnect from that, they will have difficulty to get there. So I think the first real step is that meaning, purpose, belonging. I do that since therefore I have a positive impact on the world. And be that Dutch State Mines, be that Facebook, be that, well, that's a good one, and be that whatever company, be that a small and medium enterprise or an academic or whatever. As an academic, if you really want to turn, and I've tried to do that, as you nicely said in the beginning, if you want to turn an academic institute into what I just described, then the whole thing is meaningfulness, purpose. And what I did, I'll give away my secret, is that I really wanted to turn the GSB into a business school that was relevant, meaningful, and contributing to the economic development in Africa. That was not the case before I arrived. Before I arrived, that was a very good business school according to a British model. And it took a while. It took a year, it took 2 years, and Koshik can certainly witness of that. He was around, so he has seen that. And then suddenly it hits in, and then you can change the world in a record time. You see, since then you get the momentum, you get the purpose, you get the meaning. And then if you have the insight and the methodology, etc. But that we have. The difficult thing is creating that, my collective intelligence story, my soccer story, creating, agree on the soccer field, being an African business school, and agreeing on that same purpose, creating a meaningful difference in the economic reality of South Africa, particularly for those that don't have. And on the moment that people share those, you can unleash that collective intelligence, and things will change. And it's not by magic, it's by hard work, eh? But it's again that power of the network. You then start to activate that network with all sort of like-minded people, at least like-minded on the purpose they want to reach. I hope this is an answer to the question. But
yeah, thank you very much. That's a really good answer. I think that's a question we've been, everyone struggles with also when you start
sure.
about these things, but you answered this on a deeper level, which is almost that level of synchronicity, the Jaworski idea that, if you align, meaning and purpose with the consciousness around us,
Correct.
this is when things can happen. Yeah, amazing. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Also, we're joined by Joachim Sturenberg from Australia. I've also worked with Joachim. He's in the health sciences, heading up the systems world, or the health perspective and the systems thinking world in the health world. He's got a question saying he's working on the systemic failures in the residential aged care system that we see now. How do you get going when the top level government funders are dictating the rules?
I always give the example of the lock. If you are with the ship in a lock, you close the lock and you do within the lock whatever you want to do. You have to make sure that those that are outside the lock, the government, gets what they want. You have to give to the emperor what the emperor desires. So if they want whatever views, files, studies, or whatever you give them, but inside the lock, you're free to do what you want to do. And what we often do is we point to that bad outside world that is difficult to change, which it is. So don't start there. Don't make your life a hell. Don't start to change what you can't change. Start to change what you can change. And what you can change is in your lock. And I would say go to one institute. Find one institute where patients, don't forget the patients, by the way, where patients and staff and whoever in the management then feel that they indeed would like to have a more meaningful, thanks to systemics, not a more systemic. You don't give a penny for more systemic, you give a penny for more meaningful. But in order to be more meaningful, you have to be more systemic, you see, and start with one lock. And once the thing is done, then you can open the lock, you can proudly talk about it to half of the world, to your ministers, to your whatever, or to a second institute. You create a second lock and a third lock. And once you have three locks, well, and you build it bottom up, but it is my ship, huh? Bring people together and give them the desire of the endless sea. That is where you start. And once you have, even in a little lock, at least a number of people that share that desire, you are going to have an impact and you are going to change. I can guarantee you. Now you can say, I'm not happy enough. It's only 5 people, fine, but you start somewhere. But don't start fighting what is too difficult, since you lose your time. It's what I learned to stay in a South African context. I never fought with the university. I always said yes, and I did what I wanted to do. Now, and that works. And at the end of the day, of course, when the thing exists, they say, hey, Walter, you never asked to do that. I said, didn't I? Shit, I forgot, How pity. Hey? How do you like it? And of course, if it works and it is meaningful, it's difficult to say this is useless, You can say that on an idea. You can more difficultly say that on a realization. And yeah, that's the way I will always work. And maybe it's not a good example, I have to admit, but it works. So close your lock and just do it with those people that are willing to do it, that are interested to do it, and then build further.
Great, thank you very much. I think that also maybe answers Claudia's question, which is about how have you worked with government and how could this organized serendipity be created on that level? I think you've
yeah, I mean, well, a university is sort of a government, isn't it? No, I did when I was in South Africa. We tried to do a lot, and of course, it's always the same. If governments have another agenda, whatever that agenda is, and I don't want to criticize them. I don't think I would be a good politician anyway. But if they have another agenda, it's difficult. If you find somebody, and on certain projects we did find people that really shared again that purpose and that meaning, and said, yes, this is important, then it starts working, you see, and then you do again a little lock exercise and then a bigger lock exercise, and eventually you show it. However, if politics remain stubborn in their thinking as they would be, then it stops somewhere. That's absolutely true.
Thank you. I see that we have about 4 minutes left. There's 2 more questions. There's actually a few more questions, and I see the hands of Neil and Dana. You've raised your hands, Neil and Dana. Would you mind maybe just quickly typing a question? We are too many people that we can actually allow people to talk. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe just kindly just quickly type a question or a remark in the Q&A box, and I'll attend to that. Thank you so much. So we have a question here from Rhoda Malchas, who is also a researcher locally with whom we've worked often. Hi, Rhoda. Her question is, at the World Economic Forum panel discussion recently, panelists described how technological advanced countries are better able to adjust to the change in the pandemic. Given the digital divide, how might we find co-location opportunities for transformative change with partners where there is no internet access or smartphones? It seems that any tools for creativity and innovation that fall outside of technology are not likely to find fertile ground. Is technological capacity the lowest common denominator for this level of transformative change?
No. No. Look, it is easier if you have access to the right technology, whatever the right technology is. But the point is create community, create space and place. And that you can do very physical. Sorry to go again to my experience in South Africa, but we created a campus in Philippi Village, you see, where there was no technology. But for the purpose of supporting entrepreneurship and socially impactful entrepreneurship, that was perfect. Now, we're not going to send a rocket to Mars with it, but that's maybe not useful anyway, you see. So definitely true that if you live in a country like the Netherlands, like we do, I have technology, but we are having technology here. So is technology a help? Yes, it is. Would it help in order to get those that have less access to another level? Sure, but don't, again, it's what I said before. Don't go to the impossible things to solve, since you're not going to solve them. Start with the possible things to solve. And the real thing is bring people together and give them the desire of the endless sea. And they are going to start creating that chip. And in that chip, my experience with all the centers that I've found funding for in the UCT, if you have an appealing story where you can explain to somebody the impact you might create, they are going to give you money. It's my experience in a lifetime. But you have to be able to show that meaning, impact, community, etc., and that you can start in a non-technological or low technological level. But I agree. When I was at the UCT, and I'm still highly interested to launch a virtual learning platform for Africa so as to give management learning access to everybody, then you're dependent on internet access, of course. That is definitely true.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much for that deep answer as well. I must just looking, I see we've finished, we've captured all the answers or the questions in the question and answer boxes. There's some more questions that were sort of mixed in the chat box. Quick question by Jim Burke, who's in the USA in Virginia.
Congratulations, by the way.
Yeah, when you're leading an organization, how explicit are you in organizing for emergence? Do you actually communicate that? How do you communicate that?
No.
Yeah.
No, you don't communicate that. I think I never shared my story of what I was doing at the GSB, never ever in the 7 years I've been there. You share your vision, you share that dream, you share where you would like to go. That's very important. You share it and you try to build it. So you try to get community around that idea. So you start with an idea. I started definitely when I had an idea, but that idea has evolved, and that process of evolving towards a joint shared meaning is what is extremely crucial. Then for those people that are interested, you can of course afterwards explain why you did it and what you did. And I did it to some people. I'm sure that Kaushik knows all the ins and outs of what I try to do as an example, but that is afterwards, huh? And at the end you could even say, look, that's sort of the story which I summarize there in my 6 points. That's the story I followed, but I would certainly not share that with people. It looks all too mechanical, and while it isn't, it looks like, and therefore people say, oh, he has an idea, oh, we have to go into what he wants, and then it goes wrong.
Great. We have one last question, and this is from Aranska Balson, I think
Hi.
asking what would be the best rules to succeed in this new world. I think given the worldview that you've given, what is the role of the coach?
The role of the coach is to facilitate that process, that 6-point process that I described there, right, around business model innovation. If you come at the last point, it is about the personal transformation of each and every participant. And there, of course, the coach hits in squarely. But again, that depends on whether the person, the company is willing to accept that coaching. So I think there is kind of a facilitation, mentoring through the first steps, or the ones I cited as the first steps. And then you get into a continuous transformation journey, as I like to call them, transformation journey, where coaching might be extremely useful, right? Since people get lost, if you really want to transform, it's extremely difficult. And you need sometimes somebody to encourage you, to give you a new perspective, to challenge you in your questions. So it's particularly once the setup is built, the personal transformation, continuous lifelong learning journey that people go through. That's where I think coaches are extremely crucial.
Great. On that personal note, allow me to, really thank you deeply and sincerely for your wonderfully inspirational or inspiring talk and presentation today. Thank you for the answers that always hit in a different direction that you think they'll be coming from, but they're always directed towards the deeper notion of what it means to be human when we are looking at each other and the organizations that we are building. Thank you so much for your time, Walter, and thank you so much for connecting with us. We look
pleasure
to sharing more ideas. And some people asked whether the presentation would be available afterwards. You and I could maybe
I have an issue, I have to be honest, since I don't have written permission of the models that are in the pictures. It are my pictures for those of you that are interested, but I don't have written permission, so I can't really share it, since I need that for privacy reasons. I'm sorry for that.
So people should look at your work that you've written up and books.
Yeah, sure. There are other things, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'll happily respond to you. So no problem.
Great. Thanks for sharing, and thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for the good questions and for engaging. We're looking forward to sharing more during the rest of the year. Thank you for your time, and go well.
Thank you.